Exploring the Word.
He loved the Word of God, and it came across in the classroom. Dr. Travis put in my heart a desire to know God through His Word. And that's what we're trying to do on Exploring the Word.
Exploring the Word, weekday afternoons at 3 Central on American Family Radio. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. North Carolina's High Court rules that a family can sue over a forced COVID-19 vaccination. Jeff Manasso with more.
North Carolina's Supreme Court reverses a lower court ruling and says that Emily Happel can sue her school district after her son was allegedly forced to get the COVID shot in 2021 at the age of 14 at a testing clinic at a high school, despite the boy's opposition and with no parental permission. The High Court ruling that state law doesn't prevent the mother and his son from suing on allegations of battery and a constitutional rights violation. Happel's suit names the Guilford County Board of Education and the Old North State Medical Society that helped operate the school clinic. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
The Trump administration is continuing its efforts to broker a ceasefire deal between Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says only President Trump could bring these two leaders together.
Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. There's only one man on the planet, and this is true, this is not hyperbole, one man on the planet who could bring them to the table and forge a lasting peace. And he's doing that right now. We're in the process of doing that. That is unique to Donald Trump.
Columbia University in New York City is giving in to President Trump's demand to crack down on pro-terrorist protests on college campuses. Alexis McAdams has the details from the university's campus.
Columbia University met at least 9 of the demands from the Trump administration, which the Department of Education says puts them on track to possibly get some of that federal funding back that was frozen. $400 million of that federal funding, so the schools started listening up. But not everybody is excited about the school trying to give in to those demands and get back on track. Students calling for protests. This after those campus protests raged on for months. The school is now banning masks after that chaos that are used to conceal the identity of students, adding more campus police officers who can actually step in and arrest the students and take action themselves.
FBI Director Kash Patel says they are vigorously investigating the domestic terrorist attacks on Tesla dealerships and will find those responsible. Former FBI agent Rob D'Amico runs Sierra Consulting. He says investigators need to look at how these people are communicating.
Well, it's tough because you have single actors out there doing things that are actually fairly easy to do. You need paint, gasoline, even a gun, and they're just going out doing it. But what they really need to do is start looking at the conspiracy. Where are these people getting the information? Who's inciting them and who's encouraging them? And we talked about these encrypted app groups back in July with the first assassination attempt of President Trump, where they're communicating on these apps. And it's really a blind spot for law enforcement and even the intelligence communities.
Canada is gearing up for an election, and polls don't look good for conservatives. Chad Groening has more.
On Sunday, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney made it official. Our neighbors to the north will go to the polls on April 28th. The governing Liberals had appeared poised for an historic election defeat this year until Donald Trump declared economic war. Canadians have rallied against Trump's call for tariffs, and now polls show the Liberals and their new leader could come out on top again. Dr. Charles McVitie is president of Canada Christian College.
The biggest issue that Canada has are the tariffs that Donald Trump is putting on the nation. And unfortunately, it appears as though the polls show that people have more trust in the Liberal leader, Carney, than they do in the Conservative leader in dealing with Donald Trump and the tariffs.
Brian Rushfield is the former executive director of Canada Family Action. He thinks Trump's statement could benefit Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives.
In an interview, Poilievre said, it's obvious that President Trump wants to deal with the Liberals because he knows they're weak and that he can get his way with them. And I think that's going to resonate in the minds of a bunch of Canadians. My hope is that the same thing happens that did in the U.S. People were saying Trump will never win, and he wins by a landslide, basically. So that's possible here, too.
I'm Chad Groening.
More news online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty Pugh.
5
The most important news ever is proclaimed on the new AFR Easter button. He is risen. Wear the button to remind those who see it that Jesus is alive and interceding for us from heaven. Order your AFR Easter buttons at $15 per 10-pack at resources.afa.net or by calling 877-927-4917. Remember, Resurrection Sunday is April 20th. Order your AFR Easter buttons today at 877-927-4917.
We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. At The Core here on American Family Radio. I'm Walker Wildmon. The show is hosted each week by myself and Rick Green. And we love hosting the program and bringing you the content, the news of the day, all from a biblical and constitutional perspective. And this is our Monday edition of the program. It's good to be with you again. Let's turn our attention to the scripture and not waste any time on content for today's program. Proverbs 3. We were in the book of Psalm for upwards of 2 years or more. And so if I say Psalm, that's why I've been saying it for 2 years. We went through every chapter every week. And so we're in Proverbs now, changing it up a little bit. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 through 7. So a lot of these verses are going to sound very familiar to you. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Verse 7, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. That's verses 5 through 7. There's a lot of wisdom here in the rest of it as well, but that's just 3 verses for us today. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 7. That's our scripture for the week. The Activate Summit registration is ending in April, which April's just right around the corner. Next week will be the first week of April. Not the first full week, but the first week of April is next week. And the 18th of April is when registration ends. So we want you to go ahead and register for our Activate Summit, June 12th through the 14th. June 12th through the 14th. So right now, here's our breakdown of pricing. $75 for ages 13 and up. That's for the main session. $50 per child for ages 6 to 12. And then children 5 and under are free. And so that's the pricing, $75, 13 and up, $50 for ages 6 to 12, free for children 5 and under. The way we have this conference, this summit structured, ages 13 and up, the main session is appropriate for them. So we want teenagers and parents and adults, grandparents together in the main session. The content's going to be age appropriate for them in the main session. And then our kids track, if you will, is for ages 6 to 12, all right? And then, of course, 5 and under are free, but that kids track does go age 6 to 12. We're going to have great speakers. Ed Vitagliano is going to be one of our speakers, Abraham Hamilton III, Todd Herman for A Disciple's View. He's going to be with us. He hosts the show the hour before me. And several others, Dr. Alex McFarland and Frank Turek. So we're going to have a great lineup. Hope to see you there. If you want to know more about that event and others, just simply go to afa.net/events, afa.net/events. And we hope to see you at the Activate Summit. First ever, by the way, Activate Summit 2025 coming up in June. We hope to see you there. All right. Well, let's jump into some of our content for today, and then we're going to have on a couple of guests in the second and the third segment. to get some insight of some of the breaking news over the last week or two. But the clip I want to play to open this discussion, this is Secretary Lutnick talking about the Social Security. And you have DOGE, you have Elon Musk and the DOGE team looking at how to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse in the Social Security program. And that does exist, by the way, and it exists pretty bigly, if you will. A lot of billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse tied up in Social Security. And this is not a new problem. This has been going on for some time. We just haven't had a president willing to do anything about it. But now we have President Trump. But the talk about raising the age of Social Security withdrawal or eligibility is, in my opinion, a distraction from the main problem, okay? And there are some conservatives, some fiscal conservatives that talk about, hey, we need to raise the eligibility age in order to make the program last longer, if you will. But in my opinion, that is a distraction. That is not getting at the root problems with the Social Security program, all right? One of the problems is that our government's been raiding it to pay for other things, all right? So the program itself left alone, untouched, and kind of unobstructed, the program itself is very solvent, all right? It's very solvent. But when you have waste, fraud, and abuse, and then the Congress is raiding it for other things, well, that's when it becomes a problem. But the eligibility age isn't the problem. It's not the root problem. So changing the eligibility age is not substantially going to change anything in the long run, all right? So that's the backgrounder here. But Secretary Lutnick explains it perfectly. Clip 2.
The key is stop sending money to the wrong place, so we can make sure we can always defend sending money to the right place. I would never allow, if I can stand it, to not pay somebody who retired at 65 their benefits.
Yeah,
I find it disgusting when we're the richest country in the world and some politician says, in order to save Social Security, rather than getting rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse, we should move it to 70.
Yeah.
How about no? How about we're rich enough to give people the benefit of the bargain of being a great American? But let's put great people in charge.
That's really well said.
All right, so his point is valid, all right? His point is valid. Proposing raising the eligibility age for Social Security in the name of keeping it solvent in the long run, if that's all you do, that's not enough. And we're going to be sitting here in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years. Let's say we hypothetically raise the eligibility age. We're going to be sitting here in 5 or 10 years having the same discussions about the same problems about the fund drying up. And if you ask the question, how much waste, fraud, and abuse is out there in the Social Security fund or the Social Security program, well, according to a 2024 report from the Government Accountability Office, they estimated that billions, tens of billions in fraud, in either missed payments, fraudulent payments, payments to people that aren't alive anymore. So this is a problem. This isn't a hypothetical. All right, this is a problem out there right now with tens of billions being misplaced, misspent, that are going to people that shouldn't be getting it. So there's some underlying problems. Not to mention when you raid a fund like this, it's a problem as well. And of course, I've got questions. There's kind of core principle questions about should the government even be in this kind of retirement savings business or not, which that argument goes back decades, which we don't have time to relitigate. So there's that discussion as well. But if Social Security is going to exist, we've got to get at the root problem of what is causing it to be unstable or kind of questionable into the future. and it doesn't have to do with the age of eligibility. All right. So that's kind of where we are now on this subject. But as with many other government programs, there are examples of the money going places that it shouldn't. People who aren't eligible, people who aren't alive anymore, things like that. And so that's the latest on Social Security. But when you look at, let's change the subject and talk about what's going on the border, because this has been, it's not getting talked about as much anymore, which that's fine. There's plenty of other things to talk about. But what President Trump did on the border is nearly miraculous. I mean, this is just absolutely wild. The total day and night change that has happened on our southern border. Let's listen to Tom Homan talking about what has happened in the first 8 weeks of the Trump administration when it comes to the drastic reduction in illegal border crossings, apprehensions, and gotaways. Let's listen.
In 4 weeks, we arrested more criminal aliens in the interior United States than Joe Biden did in a year, first of all. Second of all, the border numbers right now are down 96%. 96% decline in 6 weeks. We did in 6 weeks what Joe Biden refused to do in 4 years. And what we needed, as the president articulated during the speech, all we needed was a new president who took border security seriously, and that's what we have in President Trump. 96% decline on border crossing. But here's the most important part, what I think is the most important part, gotaways. Under Joe Biden, we got 2.2 million people cross the border, weren't apprehended, weren't fingerprinted, weren't vetted. 2.2 million people came into this country, and we got them on video, drone traffic, sensor traffic. They weren't apprehended because Border Patrol was too busy changing diapers, making baby formula, taking care of the humanitarian crisis of people coming across that border by the millions. 2.2 million people cross the border. We don't know who they are, where they came from, why they're here. Gotaways by average were 1,800 a day under Joe Biden. 1,800 people a day crossed this border and weren't apprehended because Border Patrol was so overwhelmed. The gotaway number yesterday, 41. 41. 1,841. That means less people are entering this country than that we don't know who they are. When you have the border, and here's where I keep preaching, but the left keeps pushing back. When you have a 96% decline in illegal border crossing, when 96% less people are coming, how many women and children aren't being sexually assaulted by the cartels? How many children aren't dying crossing that border? How many pounds of fentanyl is not getting into this country to kill Americans? How many people on the terrorist watch list aren't escaping this country? How many billions of dollars are the cartels not making? A secure border saves lives, and that's what President Trump has done. We were saving lives by the thousands simply because we have a secure border. We got more to do. Look, we were arrested about 3 times more than Biden did in 1 month. I already talked about that. In 1 month, we compare his month to our month, we're arresting 3 times more than Joe Biden did. That's not enough. We need to do 10 times more because he wasn't doing squat.
Yeah.
So the media's been all over me, well, are you happy with the numbers? I'm happy. I'm not satisfied. We're not going to rest. I'm not going to sleep well at night until every public safety threat, illegal aliens, eradicated from this country. That's when we'll relax, and that's when we'll take some action.
So that's Tom Homan, border czar, on what the administration is doing at the southern border. But it's just phenomenal what they've done overnight. And the deportation rate does need to increase, in my opinion. I just don't think they're deporting enough. And here's also, I want to kind of push back on this notion that we should only deport people who have committed multiple crimes in our country, okay? Because there's unfortunately, criminal activity gets broken down into 2 categories when we're talking about non-citizens, when we're talking about illegal immigrants. There's the initial breaking of the law, which is called crossing our border without permission, all right? So if you invade our country, if you cross the border without legal documentation, then you have committed a federal crime, okay? You've committed a federal crime, all right? So that's crime number 1. And then if you commit more domestic crimes, either local, state, Federal crimes, that's crime number 2, 3, 4, and 5, etc., so on and so forth, okay? So every illegal immigrant that has crossed the border illegally, they are by definition criminals, okay? So I think we need to expand our deportation qualifications beyond just gang members and MS-13 members. We need to take this to others who have crossed the border illegally that should not be in this country. We'll be back in a few.
Rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. President Trump's EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin has announced the largest deregulation action in U.S. history. For years, regressives have used the environment to impose all manner of insane shackles on the American energy and automobile manufacturing sectors. According to Administrator Zeldin, this is the greatest day of deregulation our nation has seen. We are driving a dagger straight into the heart of the climate change religion to drive down cost of living for American families, unleash American energy, bring auto jobs back to the U.S., and more.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner, or visit the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
Can you be gay and Christian? What if you genuinely feel like you're trapped in the wrong body? Did God make you this way? Is change even possible?
Dr. Michael Brown.
Countless people ask me these very same questions, some of them quite desperate, many of them in tears.
Would you be ready to give a godly answer?
Each one represents a person or family member or loved one who's struggling deeply with their core identity.
Satan wants to deceive and destroy God's truth.
So we know that what this gay affirming agenda within the church is doing is it's fragmenting Scripture, it's dumbing down the Bible.
And infiltrate the church with his lies. In his image, clearly and compassionately presents God's truth through Bible teaching, science, and the testimonies of those who know both sides.
My dad walked in the door and he said, "Denise, I want to talk with you." And the first words out of his mouth were, "I want to become a woman."
Get the 2 DVD set at resources.afa.net. resources.afa.net.
Hello, this is Tim Wildmon, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Hey, we've got some very average tours lined up for you in 2025. And so if you are interested in any one of these, we would love for you to join us. Again, the food will be so-so. We're using yellow school buses this time. And we're not making reservations at any of the places we're going, so it'll be hit and miss. But if you just like to live on the wild side when you tour, then we got a tour for you in 2025. We're going to Williamsburg, we're going to Washington, D.C., and we're going to Boston. Williamsburg and D.C. in June and September, and Boston in October. For all the information on these tours, go to wildmongroup.com, WILDMON group.com. And there you can find out if I'm really serious. I'm just kidding, folks. These are going to be outstanding tours that you're going to want to go on with us.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to The Core here on American Family Radio. Well, one thing I failed to mention, and I really lost my train of thought in doing that on live radio. It was not very fun, my friend. Trust me. You'd think losing your train of thought talking to your family member is embarrassing. Try losing your train of thought on live radio. But I did last segment. You didn't know it, but I did. I totally lost my train of thought. And so I shifted the subject. But what I wanted to mention, the point I wanted to make on the Social Security, the topic of the long-term health of the Social Security program, is that population decline is adversely affecting the Social Security fund. All right, because when you have less babies, then that means less workers in the years ahead are paying into this system. Okay, when you're talking Social Security, so population decline. People wonder, how does that affect our country and our physical aspect of our country? And population decline does in many ways affect our country, but that's one of the areas is you have less less working age adults paying into a program and more people pulling out of the program than are paying in, that becomes a problem in the long run. And that's going to continue to be a problem until we fix and address the population decline issue that I've talked about frequently. All right, changing subjects, going to the topic of judges and the courts, the federal court system and the Supreme Court, and how President Trump seems like battling a district court judge at every turn. We have on with us now Phillip Jauregui, senior counsel over at AFAAction, and he's with us now. Hey, Phillip, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks a ton, Walker. Great to be with you.
Phillip, let's break down what the issue we're facing today, the Trump administration is facing today. Court challenges is not a new thing. Every president, has to litigate many of their policy items in the court system and ultimately prevail at the Supreme Court in many cases. But the sheer amount of district court judges that are coming down against President Trump's policies, it just seems staggering. And when you look at the numbers, it actually is unusually high, the number of district court judges jumping in and putting a kibosh, at least temporarily, on President Trump's agenda. So set this up for us.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it, Walker, goes back to the left, them trying to use the power levers where they have them. And they've lost, they got shellacked in the last election. So they lost the White House, the Senate, and the House. They no longer own the Supreme Court. Not that the Supreme Court rules for the right every time, but they're no longer a captive of the left. And so the left was kind of looking at where do we have power? And they have some bureaucrats and they have some lower courts. And so that's where they've gone, but they've done it at a pace that's astounding. I mean, I heard Friday, Walker, there were now over 120 injunctions, which is more than the number of executive orders that President Trump has issued. So this is truly unprecedented. And for me, it's not approaching a constitutional crisis. It is, in fact, a constitutional crisis. It's very serious.
Yeah, it is. And the number you just mentioned of just injunctions is probably accurate because not all injunctions are nationwide injunctions. But when you're talking about nationwide injunctions, which are obviously egregious or even more egregious than these kind of narrowly tailored injunctions, you're looking at 64 in the first term. President Trump had 64 nationwide injunctions against him. And then this is just going to keep adding up. When you compare the numbers, you say, okay, well, how does that compare to maybe Bush or Obama or Biden? So President Bush, who also served 2 terms, only had 6 nationwide injunctions against him, against his administration. Obama also served 2 terms, only had 12 nationwide injunctions against him. Biden only had 14. Now, that was 14 in a matter of 4 years. But Trump, 64 plus nationwide injunctions. Phillip, you can't look at this. You can't look at this and say that the courts are not targeting Trump. They're clearly targeting Trump here.
They are. And, the Supreme Court knows it. They're not dumb. But what they've been doing, it appears, is they've been being pacifist and laying back and trying to let this work itself out. The problem is there's some serious things happening. And if the court just lays back and tries to let the lower courts work it out, the danger is that you start having people disobeying court orders because they're so ridiculous and oppressive. And then the entire judiciary suffers, including the Supreme Court, because the prestige of their authority is lessened. And that's indeed what's happening now. And I hope it doesn't continue. I'd love to see the Supreme Court step in and clean its own branch up.
Let me ask you this, Phillip, and I don't want to get too lost in the weeds, but the details are important here, and the facts are important. And let me just kind of ask you a question. All right, so to me, nationwide injunctions, a nationwide injunction being used by anyone except the Supreme Court, to me seems contradictory. Like the fact that a district court that has clearly, by definition, is given jurisdiction over a specific district as assigned by Congress, being able to apply a nationwide injunction, that to me, that doesn't even add up. That doesn't even make sense. So what's the history of single lower court judges using this nationwide injunction tool?
Yeah, I would have to go back and really look in detail, Walker, to see what the history is on whether, when was the first district court that issued a nationwide injunction and made it enforceable immediately. And I don't know the answer to that, but I know, you quoted the numbers, and by sheer virtue of the numbers, Bush had 6 in 8 years. Trump had 64 in his first 4 years.
Yeah.
And a nationwide injunction, there are a couple ways to look at it. One is, if the court had the humility to simply say, okay, I'm issuing a nationwide injunction, but I'm just one district court judge in, say, the Southern District of New York, and I'm not going to make this applicable nationwide, or I'm going to say I think it should be, but I'm going to go ahead and say that my order is not enforced unless and until the U.S. Supreme Court affirms it. That's something that ought to happen, and the Supreme Court ought to say that. And if they don't, then the House and the Senate ought to pass a law that simply says that's the way it's going to be. Nationwide injunctions are not enforceable unless and until the Supreme Court steps in and says so.
Yeah, that would make sense. What do we do from here, Philip? Because it's your kind of your rebel side of you, your 1776 side of you wants to say, we ought to just ignore them. And I know, I know some constitutionalists can make a pretty strong argument for that when it comes to separation of powers. But what do you do here?
Yeah, I think that's where we are approaching. And matter of fact, it even happened in the Tren de Aragua Boasberg ruling. I mean, President Trump said, well, we didn't disobey the order. I think they did. They did. And I think they did it in a good case, and it was smart to do it in that case. But the Supreme Court just has to get involved and police their own branch. Because if they don't, another thing that can happen, Walker, a lot of people forget, but Congress has the power of the purse. I remember probably about 10 years ago, I was up in D.C., and I had heard that one of the justices, I can't remember if it was Scalia or it may have been Kennedy, it may have even been the chief, but they literally were over visiting the Speaker of the House to lobby Congress for their budget. So the Supreme Court doesn't print their own money. They don't make up their own budget. Congress gives it to them. And Congress has the ability to start to rattle the purse here and to say, guys, if you don't straighten up, we're going to freeze your salaries and we're going to reduce the entire judicial budget. Or Speaker Johnson could say, hey, Chief Justice, I'm going to be sending Elon Musk over. Before we do any further budgets for the judiciary, we're going to check out the governmental efficiency of judicial expenditures. Now, Walker, they wouldn't actually have to come to reducing the budget, but when Robert starts hearing people talk seriously about his budget, it's going to get his attention, and perhaps then he'll be motivated to get the Supreme Court involved to start doing their job. I mean, Walker, we're not asking them to be corrupt or just comply with our will. We're simply saying, Supreme Court, get involved. Do your job. Take these appeals and correct these lower court abuses, or something else may happen that you won't like.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the issue here is that the Supreme Court correcting the wrongs, righting the wrong here, is the most civil approach on all sides.
Exactly.
Because this is what this is within their purview. I mean, slapping down lower courts is what they do by definition, being the Supreme Court. So, and to me, even looking at this from a non-ideological vantage point, which might be a little naive, if I'm the Supreme Court, I actually wouldn't like lower courts overusing nationwide injunctions. I mean, that would kind of irk me that they feel like they're entitled to a nationwide injunction tool when clearly that's left up to the Supreme Court as far as jurisdiction goes.
That's right. And Walker, too, I mean, if the Supreme Court were to stay the lower court orders, then it would make sense for the Supreme Court to say, we're not going to get involved in the final, resolution of the case. We want this to work itself out at the lower court. But while it's working itself out, let's not have an injunction that binds the President of the United States from doing his job for 6 months, 12 months, 2.5 years before the case gets up on appeal.
Yeah.
So there has to be a resolution of this. There are a lot of reasonable things that can happen. But if the Supreme Court doesn't get its own house in order, it could get ugly for them. And frankly, it ought to if they don't solve this problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it needs to be addressed. I mean, this whole passivism, I know you talk about this often.
Yeah.
This passivism, or hoping somebody else fixes it. I mean, these guys got to get it together because, thankfully, we have a court that leans conservative. They're not all, the best of the best, and you talk about this often, but the court is leaning conservative. It is. And so I'm thankful to God, and I mean this sincerely, that we don't have 5, 6, 7 liberal justices on the court because this would be even more of a disaster than it already is today. Yeah. So thankfully, there's at least a semblance of hope that the Supreme Court weighs in here, but they're going to have to do it quick, Phillip, because the clock is ticking and Trump is losing time on his agenda.
He is, and there will come a day, I think, in the near future where the talk increases of not following these corrupt, obviously unlawful lower court orders. By the way, that word lawful, I think, is interesting, Walker, because it presumes that the order is full of law. But when a lower court judge is just issuing an order and claiming it's lawful when it defies the law, then the question becomes, is it really lawful? That's a problem. And the more this continues to come up, the people are upset, Congress is upset, the president is upset, and the entire judicial branch is going to suffer if the Supreme Court doesn't get in gear and solve the problem.
Yeah. To me, the power of the purse with Congress is a big, big deal. And it's not just the power of the purse, Phillip. Congress also has the constitutional authority to set up these districts and these courts and also take them down or change how they're structured, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They could abolish, for example, the D.C. district courts and the D.C. circuit courts, assign those cases to other circuits. Or, this is an interesting one, I like this idea, Walker, just simply tell the Supreme Court, we're giving you original jurisdiction in every lawsuit against the executive, the presidency. So now you don't have lower court injunctions. The Supreme Court has to try all of them with original jurisdiction. Not only does that address the problem, but the Supreme Court doesn't want that workload, right? They want to sit back and write their law review articles in the form of opinions.
Yes.
Well, when they actually have to start trying cases, and Congress can make them do that. I think they'll change their tune and they'll say, oh, wow, we better deal with this problem or it's going to get worse for us.
Yeah. Yeah. The separation of powers, a lot of folks view the judiciary as this completely autonomous, branch of government that just kind of poofed out of thin air. But that's not true. Congress set up everything about, obviously, the Supreme Court. I believe is mentioned specifically in the Constitution, but all of the lower courts, it's a creation of Congress as far as the specifics goes. So Congress definitely has a say here.
They absolutely do. And they can, another interesting thing, Walker, when we talk about funding, the Constitution does say that the salaries of the judges cannot be diminished during their service. But Congress can freeze their salaries, and then it can say, as for the rest of the judicial branch, these non-judges, support staff, law clerks, everybody else, we're going to cut the entire budget by 10, 20 or more %. And then, Chief Justice, you're going to have to figure out how to make those reductions. But we're not reducing the judges' salaries because we can't constitutionally, but the rest of the budget is going to be cut. And I think, Walker, that would be effective because there's so much budget cutting going on right now in D.C., that's not an empty threat.
Yes.
If Congress is talking about that, I think the court would have to seriously see the legitimacy of it. And for members of Congress to even challenge them and say, look, everybody else is cutting their departments. Look at the executive branch, judicial branch. We have a massive debt. You need to participate with us. And matter of fact, you're going to, because we're the ones that have the power of the purse. Your budget's being cut.
Yes, I agree. And the core effect there is that you're sending a signal to the judiciary that they're not rogue. They're not on their own island.
Yep.
That they're part of the three co-equal branches of government, and they have to answer to the people too.
Exactly. The court likes to talk about judicial independence, Walker, but we would say, sure, they're somewhat independent, but they are not independent of their duties under the Constitution.
Exactly.
They have to remain tethered to the law, and if they depart from it, they're putting themselves in danger.
That's right, and it's up to Congress and the president to intervene as the other two branches. Hey, thanks, Phillip.
Absolutely. Thanks a ton.
All right, folks. We'll be back in a few.
Gossip. It isn't easy to kick. Who doesn't want the insider info? Who wouldn't want to be the bearer of this week's most exclusive whisper? How then do we bless the name of the Lord when we were just cursing his child? How do we bear his name while we so flippantly defame his very likeness? So put on the full armor of God and let one of us who is without sin throw the first stone. I'm Lauren Bragg, and you can read Gossip and the Gospel on thestand.net.
Thoughts of the child you were carrying keep pouring over in your mind. A deep, unrelenting sadness overshadows your days, and you wonder if you will ever feel whole again. There is hope and healing from a reproductive loss. Call the International Helpline, 866-482-LIFE, and talk with someone who has been where you are. Your call is confidential, and we will help you find healing. 866-482-LIFE.
As Christians, how can we even begin to impact others when we live in a culture where truth is relative? It all starts with God's Word. Join us for Activate Summit 2025 at Cadence Bank Conference Center in Tupelo, Mississippi, June 12th through the 14th, 2025. The theme is Biblical Bedrock, building on the authority of Scripture, and it's designed to help you acknowledge the Bible's authority and submit to the clear teaching of Scripture. Hear from Frank Turek.
Evolution describes what does behave, not what ought to behave, right? It doesn't give you oughts, it just gives you what does happen.
Todd Herman.
God always uses evil for good. He is very intentional, and he intentionally chose you to live through times such as these.
And more. The main sessions are for ages 13 and up, while Activate Kids is a separate track for ages 6 through 12. Register for Activate Summit 2025 by visiting activate.afa.net/summit.
Activate Summit 2025.
Activate.afa.net/summit.
If you're 65 or older, you know this. Seeing your healthcare costs go up and up is frustrating. And maybe you were just notified that your Medicare costs are increasing again, or you're just tired of the massive deductibles. Well, here's some good news. There's a program that can really help with this. It's MediShare 65 Plus. It's an affordable, reliable alternative. You can choose any Medicare provider. You get telehealth access anytime you need it. And MediShare 65 Plus is a low-cost option for those with Medicare Parts A and B, and it fills in the gaps where Medicare stops. MediShare is a Christian healthcare community that aligns with your faith. People actually pray for you. They encourage you, and it's proven, too. It's been going strong for over 30 years now. So call now. You can get one low monthly price for up to 10 years. You're not stuck with increasing costs. You can do something about this today. Call MediShare 65 Plus. Find out how much you can save. Call 833-45-BIBLE. That's 833-45-BIBLE. 833-45-BIBLE.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to the program here on American Family Radio. Well, Phillip Jauregui, who I just interviewed last segment, has an excellent article, opinion piece over at afn.net, and it's actually going to roll off the homepage probably this afternoon. We might get him to keep it up for a few more hours, but if you want to check on that and read that article about what's going on at the Supreme Court, you can go over to afn.net. It's right there under the trending stories. It's already got 15,000 reads. You can check out that article by Phillip, share it on social media, etc., talking about the very matter that we talked about last segment. All right, moving to our next guest, Barbara Lyons is with us. Barbara is Special Projects Coordinator with Patients' Rights Action Fund, and Barbara's with us now to talk about what's going on in Illinois. Hey, Barbara, welcome to the program.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be with you and your listeners today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Barbara, the what is called, commonly called, doctor-assisted suicide has been a topic of discussion for a long time now, and certain states, especially certain liberal states, have legalized this, unfortunately. One that is considering it is the state of Illinois. So we wanted to bring you on to bring us up to speed about what is going on in Illinois. So kind of give us a little context here.
Okay, I would say, Walker, that the two states that are in most danger of legalizing right now at this time are Illinois and Delaware. And certainly proponents want to put Illinois on their chart because it would be the first Midwestern state to legalize. And that would give them a springboard, of course, to other Midwestern states. So the Illinois legislation was proposed, SB 9, HB 1328. There's been one hearing on SB 9 so far in Chicago. That was last month. And we're expecting some hearings, another hearing in the Senate and a hearing in the House, but we're not sure when. I think probably the good news I can share with you in Illinois is that they expected to just ram the bill through, and they've been having trouble getting traction. That being said, this bill will be live for 2 years, so we can't sit back and expect that it won't go someplace in the future. So that's pretty much what's going on. The Illinois bill is one that essentially would legalize assisted suicide. It would some of the bad parts about it. Well, the whole bill is bad, but some of the worst parts of it are that it's like a fast track. 5 days you make the request, and 5 days later you have your prescription. That's not a lot of time. For someone to make a decision that they're going to end their life. And this is someone making the decision to end their life, or because there are really no protections that extend for particularly people with disabilities, those with perhaps mental conditions, someone else either coercing or even making the decision for them. For example, there's no requirement that a medical professional be there at the time that the lethal prescription is taken. And once the prescription is written, like a greedy heir or a tired caregiver could pick up the prescription, or it can actually in Illinois be delivered right to your home. And essentially, without asking the patient, they could put the lethal drugs in the patient's food without their consent. So there are those aspects of it. The Illinois bill attempts to protect, quote unquote, people with mental conditions by saying that can't be the sole reason. But then there's no requirement that there be a psychiatric evaluation. So, those are some of the problems with the Illinois bill that, of course, are evident in bills and in past laws in other states.
Yeah, the fact that our government, that people actually talk about this, with a straight face and without batting an eye is quite shocking. But when you look at the radical abortion culture that we live in, and when you balance that out, it's not shocking. But there's so much wrong with this. Let's talk about, I know you talked about some of the kind of process issues with how this could be, could go south really quickly and people basically being murdered without their knowledge of what's going on. But talk about the human dignity aspect of this, because all of this is operating, a lot of folks operate under the assumption that this is moral, that this is actually virtuous. But in reality, this is some evil stuff going on. So talk about kind of the human aspect here.
Sure, I will. Now, I think it's important for people to understand that the main argument the proponents use that essentially grabs legislators and the public is the emotional one, that people are dying in unbearable pain. And they stress that over and over again, and they have a lot of people come forward who talk about either themselves not wanting to die in pain or experiencing relatives who have died in pain. But interestingly, if you look at the reports from states that have legalized assisted suicide, pain is not even among the top 5 reasons that they are choosing to end their lives. They're ending their lives for loss of dignity, loss of bodily functions, less able to enjoy life. So that's kind of the human part of it that we focus on in terms of explaining to people that, while you think it may be legalized for this reason, it's really been legalized for that reason. And it also distorts the practice of medicine, because we look at our medical profession and our doctors as healers. And this puts them on a different path as it goes beyond healing. And many times doctors can't heal you, but they can certainly keep you comfortable. But this goes beyond that and says, well, they can give you a drug that will help you to kill yourself.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it's shocking. I mean, it's so inhumane and so wrong in many areas. And you're turning, to your point, you're turning a profession that by definition has existed throughout mankind to bring about healing, to bring about wholeness, to bring about restoration, or at least attempt to, right? In some circumstances, we understand that's outside of the control of the doctors, but they do what they can, right? They're always looking out for how to extend the life of the patient, how to make the patient more comfortable. But taking the life of the patient is contradictory to the entire medical profession. What's your experience? Once again, we're talking to Barbara Lyons with Patients' Rights Action Fund on medical or doctor-assisted suicide in both Illinois and Delaware, legislation pending before those lawmakers now. Barbara, what's your what kind of impression or what kind of feedback, if any, do you get from actual physicians on this? Because of course you're going to have your doctors that are bought and paid for by the lobby pushing for this legislation, but physicians out in the field, what kind of feedback do you get from them on this?
I would say, unfortunately, it's mixed, and that the part of the medical profession that we're most worried about are the medical students. Now, we've worked on the American Medical Association on provisions there that the American Medical Association, which is the largest medical association in the country, is opposed to assisted suicide. But there have been several attempts to get them to change their position to one of so-called neutrality. Well, if you're neutral, it means you really, it's okay for it to go on. And so we've worked with, and there are doctors within the AMA that have proposed changing the position to neutrality. And when we've worked at their meetings, we find that there are a lot of medical students that are leading the charge for assisted suicide to be like a neutral thing or a supported thing. So that's very troubling to us. And the same thing is happening right now in the American College of Physicians, another very, very large group. And we've worked to keep assisted suicide opposed in both the ACP, the AMA, and the World Medical Association. So again, there are attempts in all of these big medical societies. Now, when it gets to the practice of assisted suicide, we found in states where it's legal, you find just a small number of doctors that are actually prescribing the lethal drugs. And in some states, and this is part of their expansion efforts, the proponents' expansion efforts, it's not enough that physicians can prescribe the drugs. They want physician assistants and nurse practitioners to also have prescription authority. So, once they get the law on the books, they come back and ask for less qualified people to prescribe the drugs. So it is a big battle within the medical professional. Again, we have numbers of physicians we work with who are adamantly opposed to either the practice itself or going to this position of neutrality. But it's a constant battle, I will tell you.
Barbara, let me ask you one more question, because you and I've we've covered kind of a couple different aspects of this, but there's one we haven't covered, and that is the just straight up mistakes that are made with this. And I'm talking about the misdiagnoses out there, or just the inaccurate diagnoses that are out there, where you have someone who is told by a physician that you only have 3 months to live, for example. And it turns out you hear stories, not all the time, but frequently, where doctors are just wrong. They just misdiagnose. I've heard people diagnosed with cancer that actually don't have any cancer, and they don't find that out until they get a second opinion. So talk about that. I mean, this truth that some people are committing suicide through this process, and they literally have nothing wrong with them from a medical vantage point.
So I think that's really an important point, Walker, because, and that's one of the main arguments we use, is that there is no magic wand that says you exactly have this many months to live. Most of these laws in the Illinois proposal is based on the fact that someone will say you only have 6 months to live. Well, your listeners, probably everybody in your listening audience knows someone who's been given a wrong prognosis such as that, and they've lived longer than the 6 months. So that's one of the arguments that we use. And also, even with a 6-month diagnosis, once they get the law on the books, they try to expand it even further. For example, in California, they're talking about removing the 6-month terminal illness prognosis and instead allow requests for those who have a grievous and irremediable disease that is causing unbearable suffering. The other place where we see this being stretched is with the issue of anorexia, which, I mean, it's a very, very difficult condition, and but it's one that can be treated. Physicians that specialize in this don't know who's going to respond to treatment and who's not. But now some anorexia doctors have come up with something they call a terminal anorexia. And literally in Colorado and Oregon, they have prescribed lethal drugs for like women in their mid-30s with anorexia. So that's one of the latest expansions that we see going on. And again, once they get their foot in the door, they come back. Now, Illinois has a residency requirement in its proposed law, but several of the states that have passed bills without laws, I would say, without a residency requirement now have removed those, like in Oregon and Vermont, and they're trying to do it in New Jersey and so on. So again, they always want more. They always come back for more. They also, for example, now Illinois has only a 5-day waiting period, but usually they start out with a 15-day waiting period, which isn't great, but it's better than 5. And now they keep whittling down the 15-day to 5 or even 48 hours. So they keep coming back for more. You are so correct that one of the big problems with this is that people can be misdiagnosed and their lives can be ended based on bad information and someone making a mistake in what they said.
Yeah, absolutely. This is heart-wrenching. It's barbaric. I mean, the fact that our culture and people in our culture view this as a viable alternative to pain and suffering and illness is just shocking to me. But this is an issue. I mean, states are dealing with this right now.
It is.
Barbara, what would you say is more pressing, Illinois or Delaware?
I would say, so Illinois, it's already passed in one house in Delaware. That's why it's pressing there.
Okay.
So the House has passed it. Now it moves on to the Senate. So that's why it's pressing there. In Illinois, it's pressing because it's new. It's kind of new in Illinois. We haven't done much work in Illinois in the past 10 years. But now there's a group of senators that are hell-bent on passing this in Illinois. And so, and I want to mention that some of our strongest allies are organizations in the disability community because they recognize that their population is at risk. So in our work, we work with people that are conservative and people that are progressive and everybody in between. And I think that's one of the strengths of what we've been doing in order to keep this issue at bay is to engage people from both ends of the political spectrum. And that way, the progressives can essentially influence their legislators more and the conservatives can impress theirs. But I have to say that, it's not a straight Republican-Democrat issue.
Yeah.
We have Republicans in some of the states that are very supportive of this, and we have lots of Democrats that are very strongly opposed. So that's why we work a rather large spectrum of groups and legislators to essentially keep this at bay.
Absolutely. All right, well, we're going to send an email. We're actually sending an email now, if it hasn't already gone into Illinois, on this issue for all of the voters and citizens in Illinois. And we'll continue to cover this and hopefully update our audience on this and maybe have you back on, Barbara. Thanks so much for coming on. And tell our audience, before I let you go, what your URL is to visit your website.
My pleasure. Great to be with your listeners. Our website is www.praf.org.
praf.org. Excellent.
Correct.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Barbara. Appreciate you coming on the program.
Pleasure. Thanks, Walker.
All right. Absolutely. www.praf. We'll link to this in the show notes over at afr.net for today's episode. On the podcast page there. Wow, that's sad. That's heart-wrenching to hear that kind of evil being considered as a viable path forward for those that are sick, that are struggling. We'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.